Parables and proverbs.
Hello and welcome back to Parables and Proverbs. I'm your host, Selah Kante. Let's just get right into it, guys. Today I want to talk about ancient cosmology and the understanding of the ancient world, okay? So, jumping right in, okay? So, in the ancient understanding, for the majority of most cultures, everybody agreed in this three-tiered cosmology, right? And so, right off the bat, a lot of people are going to think of, oh, like the three heavens, right? And yeah, I would agree with that. And again, in the debate of the different cultures, that it's within the details, right? But in majority, most cultures agreed in three tiers, with there being the heavens above, uh, earth being the middle, and there being an underworld, right? With a most times with a firmament dome. Most people know are aware of what the firmament is, but a dome separating between the middle earth or the middle heaven, earth, and the heaven of heavens, right? And I don't mean to be getting right into it and just like overloading with some information with those who aren't aware, but we're going to slowly start unpacking these piece by piece, right? And so, like I said, there's the three tiers, right? And I'm mostly going to be speaking from a ancient Hebrew understanding, because again, that's what I'm most familiar with. But I'm going to be touching on some other cultures here and there, and mainly towards the end, we're really going to be looking at all of the cultures and cross comparing. But I'm going to be using Hebrew cosmology as a base understanding. Um, in explaining these things. So, like I said, right, we have the heavens above, we have earth in the middle, and then you would always have the underworld, right? And so, let me pull this up here. Here's a picture of, like I was saying, that most people are familiar with when talking about, the separation of the heavens and the firmament, and that's what's being described in this photo here. So, like I said, I'll be mainly explaining from a Hebrew understanding, right? And so, as I was saying, you have the heavens above, and you have the earth, which you can see, which is underneath the dome there, which is the firmament, right? And you have the underworld or Sheol with the Hebrew understanding. And so, in most cultures, Sheol was the underworld where everybody went when you passed away. Um, and so, again, going to things, especially with a Christian understanding of when Christ said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," right? He didn't say you'll be with me in heaven, but today you'll be with me in paradise. And again, maybe that'll be something we'll break down even in more depth in the future. But that being with a residence within Sheol, if you will, um, because again, nobody had yet atoned to make it into heaven. But again, just speaking from a Christian point of view. But so you had the underworld or Sheol, right? And you had Earth or Eris, which was the middle tier, and then you had the heavens of heavens or the Shemayim. Well, you had the heavens, the Shemayim, and then you had the heavens of heavens, which is the Shemayim of the Shemayim, right? And like I was saying, with the firmament separating the two, right? So in most cultures, ancient cultures, in their understanding, within the firmament is where the fixed lights most languages will use, meaning the sun and the stars and the lights in the sky, right? Uh, were in the firmament, right? And so everything basically from the moon down was considered part of the heavens to earth, that was part of the heavens. So as we're walking around, it'd be like your head's in the sky or your head's in the heavens, right? And hence going back to that first picture, right? Again, when we started thinking about these spiritual topics and things like that, that's a very basic understanding, but introduction into what we're talking about, right? And so you had the Shemaim, everything below the moon, and the Shemaim, the heavens of the heavens above that, right? And that's where God's throne would sit. And I don't mean to just bypass Eris, but I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with what Earth is. But so again, that's part of the beginning of the ancient understanding, right? And so again, just to add a little bit of the again, Shemaim is from the Hebrew, but then so you had like Akkadians who used words like Shamu, meaning the sky or the heavens. Ag- Again, giving that same impression of something outside of this universe, right? Um, and again, like I was saying about the firmament, right? You have what most ancients thought was a solid glass-like dome, right? And so in Hebrew, it was called the rakia, and within the rakia, again, when you look in, speaking from a biblical understanding, um, you see that within the creation story, and when he says separating the heavens from the heavens, separating the waters from the waters above from the waters below. And again, the firmament was thought to be the windows or the doors, right, within to these realms, mainly referring to like floods and stuff like that. Um, but also, again, with certain cultures and when talking about portals, if you will, right? But so going back to the rakia or the firmament, um, rakia comes from the verb raka, which refers to like a goldsmith or a silversmith, mainly meaning somebody who beats out metal, like for swords and stuff. But not just limited to swords, but any metals. But going to the ancient understanding of that, again, going to creation, um, the language that's being used is God hammering out the firmament like a piece of metal. And within another episode in the future, I'm gonna go into that a little bit more. Um, Mainly talking about again how the whole universe being set up, and within the creation narrative, creation in itself being this cosmic temple, right? But I don't mean to be jumping the gun. Let me wind it back a little bit. So again, you had Earth, the middle layer, or so we just got done talking about the Shemaim, the heavens, and the firmament, and the waters above being separated from the waters below. Again, most cultures believed in this type of cosmology. Again, I'll show you the different images of the different cultures depicting these. Again, some of it's more within the details of like what's where and this and that. But again, some of us are just too stuck in our ways to be open to seeing other people's understanding, where you might just describe it like this and I might describe it like this, and if I'm not familiar with being acquainted with what then there's no way for me to get my point across with just saying the same thing over and over if you're not understanding, right? But so you had the earth, so you had the Shemaim underneath the moon, right? All the stars in space, if you will, because again, they didn't have rocket ships and stuff like that to go, and there was no heliocentric model, right? So again, going back to the ancient understanding, most cultures had a geocentric, so meaning everything was revolved around the Earth, right? And heliocentric, then meaning everything revolving around the sun, right? Helios. And so within sorry, within this geocentric understanding, right, that's where firmament, if you will, comes in. And again, in my opinion, I think people close it in too much, like have a smaller understanding or not open to it. Because again, it's not a salvation topic, it's not something that's gonna lead you to hell. So why die on that hill or not be open to hearing other people's opinions on what it may be? Just like the location of Eden, right? But so um in my opinion, again, I'm pretty sure talked about the expanding universe. Uh, and again, you can never really reach the end of the universe because it's always expanding, right? So if it's always expanding, by the time like if we had something to reach it and come back, then or even just seeing it, right? Then really it's already happened or something else is happening. Like it's a delayed reaction if we're seeing it from that far away. But all that to say that the firmament, what if it's steadily expanding like that, right? Like we don't that's not something that's necessarily stuck on. I keep trying to say that or describe how these pictures, again, we're talking about like the underworld. So like where you go, where you die, again, is talking about your physical body, obviously not homies in a casket. But so with that, knowing that, right, why are we stuck in this physical understanding or looking at everything that's depicted in these as just the physical world, if you will, and not the spiritual world over the physical? So, like the different dimensions, right? And so, again, we're not keeping those things in mind, or we're just like, oh, that can't happen, this, and that. But all that to say, we're talking about the firmament and Earth, and the reason why I say that, what happened here? The reason why I say that is again, we're gonna start talking about the understandings of the primordial waters and the underworld, right? So you can see some of the waters on the side there, right? And so you had Sheol again, which was the underworld, and again in other cultures, you had Tartarus, you had Hades, and even Jesus, he says, so the gates of Hades won't prevail against the church, right? But that's again showing, placating to the other cultures or religions and their understandings, to again show that you can still explain to people or reach people with your understandings of spirituality if you're able to define it correctly and use them in the right sense. And so, again, with the Sheol, you see it being connected with the waters underneath, and on the picture on the right there, you see um, Leviathan depicted there with the pillars of the earth, right? And so, again, I think it's in Job. He says, "Were you there when the foundations of the earth were laid?" Right? And so, the same thing that you see in all these other creation stories, you'll hear them talking about the primordial waters, and typically this chaos creature, more times than not, a chaos serpent or dragon within these waters, or sea snake. Um, and again, that's what like thinking about the Noah's flood, right? So those waters from the heavens that were open were supposed to be those primordial waters. And so again, through the firmament you had these windows of heaven where the water, where rain was allowed in. Again, in most ancient understandings, they have these windows of heaven, if you will, of where rain came through from the primordial waters when talking about treacherous weather and things like that. And those windows, again, being part of the firmament, also having the morning and evening gates for the sun and the moon. I meant to make mention of that when speaking on heliocentric versus geocentric. So again, that's that was their way of understanding how the solar system was working. Sorry, but so going back to the primordial waters, and you see this, and again, there's debate even within Christian community of Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2 of what's called the gap theory, and talking about when the earth was formless and void, right? The words there being tovu vabohu, and again, another episode I'd like to do, like to really go in on, but just to highlight, to show these connections, right? Um, these primordial waters were referred to as Tehom in Hebrew, right? And so you see that in the Tohu with the Vabohu, and with Tehom meaning the great deep or the abyss with the waters, right? And so again, with that separation, more or less, the debate being with the Tohu Vabohu within the Christian community, is that a second creation in Genesis 2 that he's describing? Because how are these primordial waters, if you will, there? Um, but so going to Tehom, and that being the great deep in the abyss, you see again connections within different cultures. Tehom comes from Taham, which is from the Proto-Semitic language. Again, I was saying I'm speaking from a Hebrew understanding. So Tahom comes from Taham, which is Proto-Semitic, meaning before that. Also meaning, the great deep or great waters. And even going over to Ugaritic, which is another Semitic um, culture, but they, are more like the ones who worship Baal and stuff like that. But they had Tahamu, which was again another word describing these great deep waters or the abyss or the primordial waters. And so how I was saying with Leviathan, again, even within their cultures, talking about the chaos creatures coming from Tahamu, that's where you get Tiamat, right? And so when I was talking about the firmament, so when Tiamat was slayed within their creation story, they again say that Tiamat's body was used for the firmament. And again, going into deeper Christian understandings or Judaic understandings, for Judeo-Christian, um, is also talking about the slaying of Rahab, and is that a correlation with the creation story before also being Rahab being Tiamat? Um, Again, though, having to be careful from a Christian understanding, because that's where you get to a more Kabbalistic understanding. Because again, they say the same thing where I think it's in like the reunion at the end. Forgive me if you will, but to sum it up, it's basically again all these depictions of when you see the Ouroboros, right, or the snake eating its own tail and everything being within that, the world being within the serpent. So that's the imagery being described, right? And so Tiamat being Akkadian, and the primordial waters, Tahom, the great abyss, all those things. Just to touch on a little bit more, again, you had I think it was either Sumerian or still Akkadian with Tiamat, where the or maybe it was Mesopotamian. I'm sorry, was the waters were also called the Apsu, and I have it in a picture later, so I'll make mention of it when we come back to it. But so, just to go back on that, one of my favorite stories being Jonah. Again, I think everybody just makes a laughing stock out of Jonah, but a lot of things in there, like one for example, everybody was like, "Oh, he couldn't survive. He couldn't survive. He couldn't survive." And when you really look at the language that's being described when in Jonah chapter 2, and he's praying out for his repentance, right? The language that's being used there, he's describing a Jewish burial, and he's talking about the reeds being wrapped around his head, like this mummification process. So again, if you're not familiar with like the Shroud of Turin, which is presumed to be the burial cloth of Jesus, with the Jewish mummification process, and so he Jonah's describing in the whale. He's saying he's describing this Jewish burial with his head being wrapped in this in the reeds of the deep, the great deep, right? And again, he talks about keep going further and further, right? And he said, "I cry out to you from the belly of Sheol." And again, that's like a near death experience, you know? Who's to say if he lived like right there in that moment, like if he was medically alive, what if he was medically dead, but he's having a near death experience, where then after, because again, there's verified people where it's happened to them too of being swallowed up by whales. So that again, who's to say that he was alive even when he was within that and not having this spiritual experience in afterlife, right? And he's saying that I called to you out from the belly of of Sheol, and he saved me. But again, maybe Jonah would be a whole good episode to do too, because again, that's one of my favorites. But to get back on um, these other primordial waters, right? And a lot of these depictions, where I want to go into next and like kind of be able to point out to you guys, is sorry, is again when we start going through these photos, I want you to pay attention to um how the earth is typically shown in a rectangular square. And again, you see, like, not in Hebrew understanding, but even within in the Bible, you have verses talking about the four corners of the earth, right? And so that's going to be another one that we'll go deeper into, but I just want to touch on for now is seeing these pictures showing the squares, right? And it's going to have these squares within the circle, right? And so, just like how I was saying about these pictures being like a 2D understanding of a 3D, 4D, however many dimensions, depending on, what spirituality you're talking about. Again, in my opinion, the more or different locations, if you will, more details that's within the space is why you get these different more heavens, like the seven heavens and the 10 heavens and things like that. Um, Even thinking about hell, right? Again, think about how I was just saying in the beginning of the podcast, talking about the heavens of the heavens and the heavens, right? So the heavens above the firmament and the ones with everything from the moon and below, right? But so even within that, and Earth originally trying to be heaven on Earth, so that's where you get the first heaven. So those three understandings, and then the underworld, which isn't in heaven, obviously. That's why it's the underworld. But so going to the four corners, right? So you'll typically see these squares within a circle. And if anybody's familiar with like hermetic understandings in books like the Kabbalion, right? They have it right on the front of the book, or even like Pythagorean stuff. Basically, it's squaring a circle, right? And so you'll have a circle, and you'll have the triangle, and then you have a square within that, right? And the square being in the center of it. And so again, that would be a very primitive understanding of showing the same thing. So the square being the four corners of the earth, and then the circle holding all of the primordial waters, right? Or I mean, the firmament separating the two. I'm sorry, from the square and the circle, just as like as you're seeing from like a side here, but so when you see the shapes, it would be as if you're looking top down, right? And so again, just how saying it's squaring a circle, so like finding the center of it, right? It going to the four corners and talking about again if it even in these understandings showing how it's spherical, how do you how do you map that out, right? And so from the four corners going out being the four quarters, really, because it's not corners, right? So there's not like they're cut off, but it's the four quarters because you take the edges out, and then that's how you get northeast, southwest, and the four uh, quarters of the earth. But so with that center square being typically the center of creation. And again, as we go through the pictures there, you'll see a lot of them with their understandings, their cities being the center of creation, right? And so even within a Hebraic understanding, you see that with the Garden of Eden. And so the Eden being the center of the earth, right? And that sitting on this like mountaintop, right? Where these giant trees were typically described. And um, I want to say it's in like Enoch or something where where they talk about the giant cedars being cut down. And so again, in a lot of these other ancient understandings, they all have these giant trees or trees of life, right, that are on these mountaintops in this center of the world, right? And again, depending on the different cultures and understanding, most of them typically again say that these mountaintops were these meeting places for the deities to have their councils. So again, thinking of like Mount Olympus, right? But so I want to start. Oh, just to make mention on that last part too. Um, and that again, from a Christian understanding, why they were making this Tower of Babel, right? To break through the heavens as this meeting point that humans could go to artificially, right? And again, maybe that'd be another whole episode we should do, but I just wanted to make mention of that. But so to start looking at some of these other pictures as we start wrapping up, again, so you see here the earth, you see this underworld, and you see a firmament and some primordial waters. And as you see, this is Sumerian. And so you kind of have the like I was saying, that first sphere on that picture on the left here, where it'd be like everything on earth. That second one being then like the Shemaim, and then that third one being the Shemaim of the Shemaim, right? And so they they had their deity on, who resided within the third heaven. Um, Again, I'm not sure if I may mention, maybe I'll break that down a little bit too. Most of these cultures, that's where the throne of God would reside. So again, from a Hebrew understanding, that's where we say God would sit on his throne. And so you see that same thing where it's being described within scripture of him walking upon this like crystal like lake, right, in Revelation. And so again, is the description there the same, being the firmament, where he's saying he's, you know, the one who sits upon the firmament, right? But so again, you have their firmament, which was like the boundary of their deity on in Sumerian culture. You had Earth, which is key, and then you had the netherworld or the underworld, and then you had the primordial waters or the Apsu, which is what I was talking about earlier. And so again, you have kind of like the same thing in Babylonian culture, and you see how within the one on the right here, you see the more circles or the more heavens that we're just talking about. But again, the basic understanding, which you can see on the left more so, because the one on the right is more simplistic, like it doesn't really show anything. But you see how the bottom on the right there is still darkened, showing like the underworld, right? And then that those other circles being the heavens, and then that bigger one being the Shemaim, or I mean, yeah, outside of that zenith being the Shemaim. And so you see the same thing on the left there, though, where you see all the same things. You see the earth, you see the firmament where the fixed lights are, you see the primordial waters. Again, going to Egyptian culture, you had Ra, which was their um, supreme deity. Again, going through these gates of heaven over top of the firmament, which was Nu, the sky goddess, and Jeb, earth, being underneath that, and Duat being their underworld, and Noon being their chaos waters, as you can see on like the top left there. And so now again with Egyptian culture, see how theirs are deities like a person, but again the zooming out of it is, again, you see the earth, you see a firmament, you see the sky, or gates of where the sun rides, these chaos waters, and the underworld. Going to Hindu, you see on the left here again what I was talking about with the Ouroboros, right? So you see where there that firmament that's trying to be shown is within the cosmic snake or the cosmic serpent. And again, you see those even within Mayan, Hindu, or sorry, I said Hindu, Mayan, Aztec, and other ones like that, talking about the cosmic serpent. And you see where I was describing about the four quarters, you see that square, right? The four corners of the earth. And then you see it, the four quarters going out to the, again, whenever you hear about these deities being within this firmamental realm where the stars reside, again, where we'll go deeper into that in one of the next episodes where we're talking about why are angels or spiritual beings related to stars and planets and things like that in all ancient understandings. But again, so this one's more of a zoomed out one before we really start going in. But so again, on the right here, and on the left, you can kind of tell, but it's smaller, that mountain, right? And that mountain being the connection point from earth to the heavens, right? And so again, same thing as I was saying, even in Mayan culture, you see the same things where you see this tree of life being depicted. You see the four corners of the earth, and then those four corners with the four quarters, right? And you see the underworld, you see the firmament, you see the chaos waters, right? Going to Incan, see the same thing, right? You see the earth, you see the firmament with the fixed lights. You see on the right here the four corners with the four quarters. Again, they're being a little bit different. Again, these are different cultural understandings, but the more you look at all of them zoomed out, like by each other, you see what they're all trying to describe, really, right? Again, even in like Navajo traditions, you see again where how I was talking about the Ouroboros with everything being within the snake, and you see the earth, you see the upper heavens, and you see an underworld. You can see more of the cosmic waters here. See, these are kind of just both black on the left one there, but again, those are the waters being separated that I was talking about earlier, right? Um, and so again, I just want you guys to see that whether it be Navajo, Incan, whether it be Tibetan, Hoodoo, Hindu, whether it be Greece, whether it be Babylonian, whether it be Sumerian, whether it be Egyptian, whether it be Persian, um, Shinto, Japanese, or Shinto is Japanese, but again, all these cultures from all different parts of the earth all had these understandings and agreed in at the bare minimum of a three-tiered cosmology where you had the earth, you had the upper heavens, and you had the underworld, right? And so in the future episodes, we're going to be going and really looking into each one of those more and more. I know a lot was kind of just dumped in this episode, but I wanted to give you guys kind of like an overall summary of what we'll really be unpacking and seeing the significance within future episodes. So thank you all for being here again for another episode of Parables and Proverbs. I'm your host, Selah Kante. Please like, share, and subscribe, and have a nice day.